welcome to Green TV, the show dedicated to green, positive solutions and the third-party and independent candidates that advocate for them. I am Gail Parker, your host. This is our benchmark show. We have with us today Mr. Gary Scott of the Fairfax County General Registrar's Office to talk with us about the process required of independent and third-party candidates to access the ballot in the Commonwealth of Virginia. By that I mean the process to be officially a candidate for office with the candidate's name listed on the ballot. Welcome, Mr. Scott.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. In order to be an official candidate, even a write-in candidate, there are certain procedures that have to be followed, and the downloadable forms are available on the State Board of Elections website, I believe, are they?
That's correct. The entire candidate package, for, every year the State Board of Elections on January creates a candidate package for every office. So in January of 2015, they will post on their website the candidate packages for local offices as well as the constitutional offices, which will be on the ballot this year: sheriff, Commonwealth's attorney, and clerk of the court. These forms have all the filing, these bulletins have all the filing requirements in them. And then from the same location, you can download any and all the forms that you need to do. The bulletins are very specific. They indicate, provide information of deadlines. There is a timeline as part of the bulletin. It indicates the deadlines for filing individual forms, with whom they have to be filed, and if forms have to be filed in more than one location.
Okay, and who sets the requirements for these forms and the filings?
Well, the requirements are set in the Code of Virginia. 24.2 of the Code of Virginia is the governing code for voter registration and elections in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The requirements for the petitions, for the filings of the candidates, are all established in that. Where the information is left a little vague, the State Board of Elections is empowered by the General Assembly to publish rules and regulations, which are also posted on their website. They also post regulations on the Virginia Town Hall, electronic Town Hall. And pending regulations, they will also post on the Town Hall for comment before taking action.
I see. So if the procedures aren't followed, then it's a matter of state code that is being broken, not just policy.
Not just policy, and they have divided the problems on the filings into material omissions and immaterial omissions. And an immaterial omission is something that really doesn't affect the eligibility of an individual to be on the ballot. Whereas a material omission is a clear violation of either the Code of Virginia or it affects their eligibility.
I see.
A sample of a material omission that we see fairly frequently with independent candidates is they will download the petition forms as 2 pages, front and back. The law requires that the form be printed and circulated as a front and back single sheet of paper. Because the information is being attested to and then notarized. Therefore, any petition pages, as an example, that are submitted as 2 pages have to be rejected without consideration.
I see. And the petitions are a requirement for independent and third-party candidates?
For independent, third-party candidates, and in some cases for party candidates.
I see. How does the process differ between larger parties and the independent and third-party candidates?
Well, the biggest difference, at least, the biggest difference is the candidate selection. In the Commonwealth, the parties or the incumbent candidates have an option on the method of nomination, whether it's a firehouse primary or a convention or a regular primary, as we just had last Tuesday. In those instances, the candidates file almost all of their paperwork with the party chair rather than with either our office in the case of local candidates or with the State Board of Elections in the case of candidates for statewide or state parties such as the General Assembly.
I see. So in those cases where the larger parties file petitions, Who validates those petitions?
That is actually up to the party to determine the validity of the signatures. There is a provision under certain circumstances where the chair of the local committee can request our office to validate the petitions. The candidates cannot. Lately, we don't see too many of those. At one time, there was a fairly recent change in the code. At one time, we were seeing many more requests to validate the petitions prior to them being submitted. But once a petition is submitted to us, it's ours.
I see. Okay, so if I understand you correctly, the party determines how many petition signatures are required?
No, that's set in the code.
In the code.
Depending on the level of office. For a statewide office, whether it's president of the U.S. Senate, it's 10,000 signatures. The other federal office, House of Representatives, it's 1,000 signatures. For the state Senate, it's 250. For all other offices, it's 125, with the exception of the Soil and Water Commission, where it's only 25.
I see, okay. So now, how does a party get the status so that they can determine if they want to nominate a candidate rather than go through the independent and third-party candidate?
Well, to be the code identifies the requirements to be a regular standard, a large political party, such as the two major political parties. The parties must have a central committee that has registered with the State Board of Elections. They must have an organized party structure. To be identified on the ballot as a political party, they must have received 5% of the vote in the preceding federal election.
5%? 5%. 5% of the vote. So it's not 10%?
Unless they've changed it, no, it's 5%. The code, the bar is fairly low, but it's high enough that it generally acts as a deterrent for most third parties.
I see. Well, that would be good news because we've been working with a 10% bar. So that would be good, very good news.
Yeah, again, that's above my pay grade there, dealing with the identification. Now, they have loosened the rules. When I first began doing this, you were either, when I first began doing this, there was no party identification on the ballot at all.
I see.
And then about 10 years ago, they began adding party identification. But you were either one of the two major political parties or you were an independent. Those are the only options. Lately, they have been identifying the smaller political parties, which not have met the criteria to be a major political party, but they have been putting their identifications on the ballot, such as the Libertarians, the Independent Greens, and the Greens.
I see. Well, gathering petitions are a very, very large part of an independent or a third-party candidate's campaign, in fact. So do you count those petitions?
It depends on the race. For the independents, the local candidates, such as we will have next year, all of the petitions for next year will be submitted directly to our office instead of the State Board of Elections, including the two, in Fairfax County, there are 3 shared constitutional officers, which are shared with Fairfax City. If the candidate for those offices lives in Fairfax County, they'll file with the county. If they live in the city, they'll file with the city. But all the petitions will be filed directly with us. The only time any petitions for the General Assembly will be filed with the State Board of Elections in Richmond, who will then farm them out to the localities to process. The State Board of Elections is not staffed nor actually permitted under the code to certify provisions. Only the localities can certify provisions.
I see. Okay.
Petitions, I'm sorry.
In your experience, Mr. Scott, what are some of the mistakes that new candidates make when they're trying to get on the ballot?
The biggest mistakes we see are generally related to the petitions. The lack of 125 petition signatures doesn't sound like a lot, but to get 125 valid petitions, you may have to collect 250 or 300 signatures. And we will see a shortfall there. Now, as long as the petition pages are filed by the deadline to file, If you come up short, you have time to submit new petition pages, and we can continue to process.
So the lesson there would be get them in early.
To get them in early, we had many people file at the very last minute for the current election cycle, and so far several of them have come up short. That's a big issue. The filling out of some of the more complicated forms, such as the campaign finance requirements, which really aren't filed with my office. Their local candidates will file with the electoral board, but they also have the option of filing electronically with the State Board of Elections, which is something we do encourage because it makes them available for review by anyone in the Commonwealth.
Right.
Those sometimes are an issue, and the filing of campaign organizations. But a day-to-day routine issue, it's the petitions almost every time.
Now, can petitions be filed electronically?
No, we must have the original signature.
You must have the, and who decides what information is requested? I know that
the Code of Virginia requires that the signature of the person signing the petition has their name, and it doesn't have to be their full name. It has to be enough for us to be able to make a reasonable identification.
I see.
The address at which they are residing. It allows the provision of providing the last four digits of the Social Security number, which assists us in identifying the signatures, but it is not a requirement.
It's not required.
It is not a requirement. One of the big problems we will see, people will have moved and not updated their address. So we can have a signature, which would be perfectly acceptable under most circumstances, but if the address does not match what we have in our database, we can't accept it.
I see.
Even if it's just the house next door, it has to be a 100% match.
100% match. Okay. What about someone who wants to sign a petition, but they don't want to give their address for some reason?
The law requires they must give their address.
They must give the address.
That's one of the ways we validate that they're eligible to sign the petition, because you must be eligible to vote for the candidate whose petition that you're signing for it to be considered valid.
I see.
And you would be surprised about the unusual names that we will have multiple copies of. So being able to identify the more information that the signature gives us, the better we are.
John Smith.
Well, we had one signature is Mike, and I'm going to use Jones as the last name. So we looked them up. Two people registered at that address: Michael Jones, Michelle Jones, both with the same middle initial, and it was Mike J. Jones. And so we couldn't identify which one it was because Mike is an acceptable nickname for a woman named Michelle.
I see.
I've got a friend nicknamed Mike, so that is, unless we can positively identify the voter, we can't validate the signature, and that becomes very important when you've got John Jones and John Jones Jr. Living at the same address. We had one address in Fairfax County. There were 7 males living at the address. All of them had the same name.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Well, tell me, Mr. Scott, what type of help can you give independent and third-party candidates when they're trying to get on the ballot or trying to run for office?
Well, our office can provide a limited amount of assistance in completing the forms. We did have a young lady working in our office who recently retired, who spent a great deal of time assisting third-party candidates in the preparation of forms. That position has not really been filled, but to the extent that we can, we will provide assistance in the office in filling out of the forms and in providing direction. We cannot fill out the forms for the voter. We, as a rule, do not provide copies of the forms since they are downloadable from the State Board of Elections website. But in instances where the candidate cannot download the form, we will provide them. We're not going to turn anyone away simply because they don't have access to a computer and a printer.
I see.
We can find the petition pages are the big things. A lot of independent candidates like to conduct voter registration drives at the same time that they're doing their petition drives. We will provide a limited number of voter registration applications for their use. And we will review the information before they accept it, and try to point out any shortcomings to make sure that, I mean, our goal is to get people qualified. So we will do whatever we can to make sure that we achieve that goal within the law.
I see. And if there are any protests, does your office get involved with those?
There is a form, that's not a form, but there is an established procedure for challenging individuals on the ballot. That's generally not handled by our office. If a person is eligible to vote in the office and they have met the candidate requirements, they've been an American citizen for 7 years, they're registered to vote in the Commonwealth, they're eligible to vote for the office, then there is no grounds for challenge, unless there is some question about the person's eligibility to be registered. And that deals with a formal challenge, which is handled by our office. They can challenge the signatures. The database that we have captures every signature that is put on, so we're able to look up and review any signatures that have been submitted, even when we don't have the copy of the petition. It's been, in these instances, it's been returned to the State Board of Elections. But I can still look up and tell you that on petition page 31, line 21, so-and-so signed the petition.
I see, great. Well, what can candidates do to make your job easier, Mr. Scott?
The easiest thing to do is make sure that the information that we get is legible. We will reject maybe 10 to 15% of the signatures that we get because we can't read anything. The printed name is either not provided or illegible, and the address is not legible. And that's a big problem. We had one independent candidate who's no longer with us, but he would only get the voter to sign the petition, and then he would fill in all the other information himself. So all the information was always legible. That's going a step far for most candidates.
Is that permitted?
It is permitted. The only thing that they can't do is sign.
I see.
The other issue is to make sure that they complete all the notarization requirements on the back. The code does require that the signatures that be notarized, that the circulator sign and make sure that they're notarized, and that the notary must have an active status and must be able to provide a reproducible stamp onto the petition page.
I see.
And the stamp is a fairly new requirement. That's something that wasn't in effect 3 or 4 years ago. But they now have to provide the stamp with its expiration date, and it has to be reproducible.
I see. Well, good. Is there anything that you can think of that we need to let the people know about?
The people should understand that they must submit a statement of work, even though you cannot begin collecting signatures for the petition until the January of the year in which the position will appear on the ballot. That when you begin collecting campaign funds or expending campaign funds, you must file statement of organization and campaign finance statement, even though you have not actively begun working as a candidate. People need to be aware that when you are running as an independent, when you file your petitions, it must be accompanied with your declaration of candidacy. We cannot accept either one of them without the other.
I see.
And to do everything as early as they can. The earlier you do, earlier in the year, the more staff I have available to screen those, because that's the slower part of the year. Once we get toward the filing, we're looking at town elections getting in the way, the primaries getting in the way, and it impacts the ability of the candidate to correct any errors that they have made, because everything has to be completed by 7 p.m. on the deadline. And that's submitted, and if something has been submitted incorrectly and it's not caught until after 7 p.m., there's nothing that can be done.
Mr. Scott, thank you very much for being on with us. And thank you for all the work you do and your staff does to free and open election.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate, we get very few words of appreciation, and we appreciate everyone we get.
Thank you. And now, in order for an official candidate to be on the ballot, there are certain procedures to be followed, and the downloadable forms are available on the Virginia State Board of Elections website, www.sbe.virginia.gov. You must complete the forms, obtain the signatures of registered voters, the numbers determined by the office sought, and submit them to either the State Board of Elections or to the Fairfax County Registrar's office for validation. We've heard a lot today about the process of running for office as an independent, and now let's spotlight a candidate who has gone through the process successfully and is now a candidate for U.S. House of Representatives from Virginia's 10th Congressional District, Dianne Blais.
Hi, I'm Dianne Blais, the independent Green candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in Virginia's 10th District. I've been a volunteer in many organizations and a businesswoman, a mother of 4 and a foster mother to over 100 children. Last year, I became a grandmother. I'm running for 2 main reasons: how the federal budget is spent and how elections are run in our country. It may seem right off that how elections are run in our country is insignificant compared to the importance of the federal budget. But I believe how elections are run currently has many long-standing negative effects. 3 areas need change: the money in politics, gerrymandering, and term limits. Politicians, at least those who are voted into office, are government workers and should accept no big money donations. I am running my campaign without accepting any money. Every corporate donation is basically a bribe, and although politicians say they are not swayed by these donations, consciously or subconsciously, they are. The effects of these bribes are seen in many bills that harm our people, especially our children. Legislators choosing the shape of their districts is a problem that many think is responsible for the partisan, dysfunctional Congress. Gerrymandering needs to be eliminated. And the last point about elections in the U.S. Congress, indeed even the state government, we need term limits. We want experienced people in Congress, but Congress was not meant to be a full-time job for life. The Independent Greens preach more trains, less traffic. We need to remove the barrier at the federal level that prevents the building of rail. The current policies say to municipal and state governments, if you build roads, the federal taxpayers will pay 80%. If you build rail, the federal taxpayers will pay 20%. The playing field should be leveled so that our municipal governments and state governments can solve transportation issues with mass transit. Rail returns $25 to the community for every $1 invested. Rail will make us safer, help us to have cleaner air and cleaner water. We will create new green jobs and reduce the debt by building rail. We need more trains, less traffic. We need to cut military spending and put that money into our people, our infrastructure, and paying off the national debt. The federal debt, now at $17.5 trillion, makes the interest payment on that debt the 3rd largest expense in the federal budget. The largest expense is the military. We are at peace. There is no reason that over half of the federal budget should be spent on defense. The incarceration rate in the United States of America is the highest in the world. While the United States represents about 5% of the world's population, it houses about 25% of the world's prisoners. We need to decrease our prison population and let nonviolent drug offenders support and be with their families. We can grow the economy, create new eco-jobs, cut dependence on foreign oil, balance the budget, and eventually pay off the federal debt. We live in a great country, but if elected, I, Dianne Blais, will work unceasingly to make it even better. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Green TV today. We'll hope you'll tune back into us again later. Remember, you can contact your local registrar's office or the Independent Greens of Virginia for additional information or for one-on-one assistance in becoming a candidate for public office.